Good morning. Welcome to a tertiary world. Today I'm reading two more memories of Rathdowne Street as they arose when I walked the street in 2008 as part of a performance project I was working on. This is a memory of Curtin Square. Rathdowne Street is the fourth north-south street and its colour is green. Curtin Square. Curtin Square is the closest one might come to, here in Melbourne, to something I can call the giardini. But giardini, what does that mean? Gardens, yes, but with children's games going on all around, dozens of prams parked in line in the shade of trees, many mothers of all ages talking to each other while sitting in a circle of chairs they have carried here themselves, little bikes for hire, fathers holding melting ice creams just bought from a multicoloured vendor's cart, hurrying towards their children, waiting expectantly near the swings, all under sunshine, glinting brilliantly off leaves and buds that have just been washed by recent rain. Is this what Curtin Square was like in 1969? No. But I could easily have imagined it so. I had just returned from Italy, where I'd spent some months in Florence, living in a cold, empty room on the third floor of a Renaissance palazzo opposite some giardini. On my return, I couldn't keep away from Curtin Square as the version most closely resembling Piazza San Nicolò in Florence. In the soft autumn days of 1969, I would often walk from a coffee bar on the corner of Princess and Canning Street to Curtin Square and sit on the damp grass listening to children playing in the nearby kindergarten and watching leaves fall ever so slowly. In the spring, I played interminable games of one-on-one soccer with Paul in the square's grassy southeastern corner. The wire perimeter fence paradoxically doubling up both as an efficient goalmouth and as a convenient containment device. One perfect blue-skied afternoon, Lynn drove past. She stopped and invited us to her house further along Canning Street for a cup of tea. Beyond the cup of tea, drunk in silence, neither Paul nor I knew why we were there, but Lynn did. We ushered us out after a few minutes, perplexed at our lack of understanding of the rules of the game. We walked straight back to the square, impatient to continue ours. We played till dark that evening, desperately determined to hang on tightly to the little of the world we understood. Afterwards, we sat in the dewy grass in the gathering gloom and looked up to see lights glowing in the upper story windows of the building on the corner, the one both of us had dreamt of owning. We sat there in silence for quite a while, watching the shadows of the inhabitants playing on the ceiling as they moved around inside their home. Eventually it got cold and we left without looking back. I have not returned to the square since. (743) Rathdowne Street. Somehow we all lived in this house, 3 families and many visitors, variously dispersed through 2 stories made up of vast rooms and endless nooks and crannies. That summer we'd just come up to the city from Baxter. We had lived for a few years in a dreamy, rambling farmhouse named Sage's Cottage, surrounded by rose bushes, green meadows, hay sheds and dairy cows. In the end, when we left, we'd come to believe that the name of the cottage might have held some truth, not about any understanding we then had about the world, but about the understanding we clearly did not have, but might one day gain. Perhaps this is just what we desperately hoped, Nothing, though, could have been further from the truth. Everything fell apart for us during that 1975 summer. Everything and everyone seemed to simply disintegrate. When we had come to the city, we'd believed that this house, with its beautiful hibiscus tree, as Emma called it, gracing the tiny front garden, promised much for our new life. But then one particular dusk, paradoxically lit by an endless and unusual array of stars, came along. I remember not being able to take my eyes off the multitude of lights in the sky as my life fell apart around me. After that evening, none of us lasted long in here. We all went our separate ways, each starting new lives whose trajectories have since then undergone endless corrections. A few weeks later, the house was leased to a number of other people, and a couple of months later, I had to return to negotiate the return of the bond. I remember walking through the front door into a universe whose dynamics had somehow mysteriously changed. A few months before, this had been a house filled with light and children, with the promise of a life to come. Everything now seemed dark and drab, walls humid and stained, inhabitants distantly silent. On my way out, I noticed that the bicycles cramming the hallway were all padlocked. Outside in the courtyard, the hibiscus tree stood leafless, flowerless, smaller, as though it had somehow shrunk. I carefully closed the gate behind me, relieved to be able to lose myself in the chaos of early evening traffic, streaming home along Rathdowne Street. I walked southwards against the flow, and even as I reached the city sometime later, I could still feel the cold chill of the cast iron gate on my hand. As I read haltingly and at times hesitatingly, it's because I'm processing the memories as I'm reading. I make it a point not to read the story before I read it to you, so that it's as new or as challenging for me as it might be for you. It might not be challenging for you, but when I pause occasionally and misread words, that's the reason why it is for me. Reading these stories brings them to life in a way I hadn't expected. And it's both welcome and confronting. But then, that's the same thing. We welcome the confrontation with both ourselves and the past. It's what our present is made up of. Until tomorrow, a few more Rathdowne Street memories. Hope you have a soft landing day. Until then.